Hello, beautiful community. Let's react to Lex Fridman interviewing Donald Trump for 40 minutes on his platform in a way that's all about authoritarian populism and us, not about the particular breakdown of the interview. I'll say a little bit about that, though. Well, let's do that to start with. I felt the interview structurally didn't work because the way Lex Fridman interviews and converses depends on a minimal dose of goodwill from his interlocutor. If that's absent and his interlocutor is spectacularly manipulative and deceptive, the format no longer quite works. Perhaps you could justify it in Lex's place if you are conversing with a deceptive and manipulative restaurateur or baker or sports person. But with a person with actual or potential political power on a very great scale, it doesn't work. And the challenge here is that within that format, there isn't much of a way to improve the situation. Within that format, it might just be true, unless it evolves for Lex, that he cannot interview somebody like Trump and have a constructive experience with any kind of, cumulative positive benefit for the social world as a result. Trump redoubled on the 2020 election lies. And that was one of the biggest places where Lex Fridman challenged him, but it was a very partial and weak challenge. What do you have to say, Lex said, to people who are independent and who don't go as far as you do in challenging the election? Trump's answer is, you've got to challenge everything, otherwise things will only get worse. He talked about carrot and stick in bringing the Ukraine war to a close and dealing with Putin in a way that's obviously preposterous for anybody who knows a bit about the situation, but actually I found that persuasive for a low information voter. He hit immigration much more than the economy. So it was immigration, 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 and he disavowed Project 2025. He said, I haven't read it. Now, the truth is, Trump actually couldn't have read it if he wanted to because of his neurodiversity. He's not capable of reading a text even half as long as that, which is not a fault. Well, it's a fault, but it's not a meaningful fault in the sense that some of the most extraordinary people in the history of human civilization were neurodiverse and also couldn't read a 900-page document. He said things in there, there are things in there I don't like, and it's unfortunate that they put it out. And he also hit Biden on not really being in charge. And there he was hitting this feeling of opacity that we often discuss, right? This feeling that you don't really know who's running the show or what show is being run. You try to touch politics, but there is nothing there when you reach out for it. You try to see it, and you're just seeing an ill-assorted game of sport with ill-assorted rules. But it's not the feeling of opacity I want to focus on. It's the feeling of betrayal, which Trump tried to exploit. Trump said to Lex Fridman, I believe these are very evil people. He's speaking about the Democrats. They are evil people. We have an enemy from the outside, and we have an enemy from within. So he's exploiting feelings of betrayal, feelings that voters have when they're convinced that their political institutions aren't just ineffective, which makes you feel unsafe, or corrupt, in some kind of trivial way, but they're corrupt in a special way of deprioritizing the actual citizens of the country and prioritizing some kind of outsider group, whether that be a group that's outside the country, like Ukrainians, or whether it be a group who've come into the country, right? So if you are a citizen who's convinced that there is that type of special corruption. That's to say that you are really being systematically deprioritized, that your government is systematically working against you, the legitimate group, in favor of an illegitimate group, then you do come to feel that they're evil. That is how come a lot of people felt in 2016 that Hillary Clinton, which she isn't, was evil. But how do you and I talk about this? And how does the way you and I talk about this relate back to how we feel about our institutions? Let's spend a couple of minutes on this. I tend to approach it like this at the moment, because I'm now a 14-year-old public intellectual. I'm developing and you're helping me get better all the time. I'm getting better very rapidly, but I'm still, in a space where there's a huge amount of improvement that I need to do in my capacity of balancing and dancing, right, in this role in a way that adds to you, because that's what it's all about. It's not about me sitting in my chair and telling you things that I think are true. That's the role of an intellectual. It's not the role of a public intellectual. So at the moment, my approach tends to be that 90% of the time, I tend to be gentle and also let a lot of things go as long as I focus on some main point. So that's more like this sounds really horrifically consumerist, and I don't feel it like that, but it's almost like you're walking into my cafe and I will give you some muffins if you want muffins, and the fact that you say things that are false or insist on me believing things that are false is not going to get in the way of me being nice to you and giving you muffins, right? If you come in and you say, I'm only buying your muffins if you don't contradict me when I tell you that the Kremlin is made out of wood, then I'm probably going to focus on the muffins, and you're going to need to get a couple of muffins, not too many, we don't want too much sugar. But that's what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to push you around on the 17 things like the Kremlin made out of wood that you raised. I met somebody actually once who spent 2 hours convincing me that the Kremlin was made out of wood, and I agreed with them entirely. For the purpose of that conversation, I was supporting a friend in a mental institution who was having a psychotic episode. These are terrible institutions, by the way. They are rarely good at meeting people's needs. But one of the folks in there was convinced that the Kremlin was made out of wood, and I co-conspired with him in that falsehood. But 10% of the time, when you come into my cafe, I'm going to say, no, let's put everything down, and let's not prioritize you getting something you want here from the counter. Let's deal with the Kremlin made out of wood thing, and there I can be brutal and harsh. I don't want to be brutal and harsh just in a sort of offhand and reflective way. That's allowed too because I'm human. But I want to be brutal and harsh in a special way. That's to say, if I had 3 months to live, how would I speak to you, right? I might spend more time telling you more abruptly things like, you got to wake up in this dimension as a citizen. There's something you're not seeing, something that's really important. You're not feeling, you're not in an adequate stance toward. You got to look right now, because you keep looking left, you're not seeing something. Do it now, wake up, right? And the rest of the time, I am going to be, well, it's about looking in all directions, and I would invite you to consider looking right. How about it? What are your thoughts, right? This is the difference. So I'm just going to recite to you a couple interactions I had that are all about this balance, but also bring out issues about authoritarian populism. So let's do it. So I had these harsh interactions on another platform, on Twitter. I said, we have got to start with the actual feelings voters have. We can't start with feelings we would like them to have, which they don't have. And the feelings that a voter has can't simply be wrong. They can't simply be an intellectual error, because politics isn't an argument. Politics is about cooperation or constructive conflict around coexistence, right? If you and I are ordering a bottle of wine in a restaurant and you want white and I want red, I can't just tell you you're simply wrong. Even if I made a good argument like the white wines on the list are bad and the red ones are good, that's still not enough for me to somehow just cancel out the fact that you're sharing this space with me and our space will work better if you're happy and get what you want, as long as it's compatible with me getting what I want. So a comment coming in, starting with the actual feelings of voters, is like saying that, it feels like the sky is not blue. Just because one feels that the sky is not blue does not make it not blue. I respond, boom, abrupt. You're wrong politically. You start with the actual feelings citizens have. That's where you've got to go. These feelings can't be an intellectual error. What you've got to do is not exploit these feelings that people have, as authoritarian populists do, not, if you like, co-conspire in factual falsehoods, but you've got to start with what people actually feel on the doorstep. Second comment. I don't give much time or interpretation to the words of a person, Trump, with an IQ of 73. Very harsh response from me. But the response is fair, but it's harsh. The chances are 99% that Trump is overall more intelligent than you. So get real in how you think about toxic, self-serving, destructive, populist authoritarians like him. Response back. I base my judgments on what people say, who may be more intelligent than me, and people who have known him for years. I say, with Trump, it's a combo of narcissism and neurodiversity and their interaction. This makes him lose his way all the time. His intelligence is spectacularly uneven, but his peaks are very strong. He's a communicator of genius, while being mostly incompetent as a political operator behind closed doors. So, having said a bit about process between us, let's just ground these truths that are really, really important. That you've got to pass this doorstep test in how you relate to your political opponents. You can't just tell them to wise up and not feel things they're feeling, because quite frankly, A, that's not going to change how they feel, and B, it's almost certain that the reason they're not feeling something that you want them to feel, instead, it's almost certain that they're feeling what they're feeling and not what you want them to feel, because of something that's deeper than an intellectual mistake or ignorance or a lack of intelligence. We can go wrong, actually, if we underestimate the sophistication of voters and citizens. So it's important that A, you realize that's not effective, and B, you realize that the problem is not misinformation. The problem is the crisis of trust. The crisis of trust is what's underneath the misinformation. If you alleviate the crisis of trust, there'll be less misinformation. But if you just try to swap misinformation and pretend the crisis of trust beneath it isn't there, it's not a good idea. And then in terms of Trump's intelligence, you gotta know your enemy, and you gotta accept that your enemy poses certain kinds of challenges and threats, or in this case, I would say, you've got to know your opponent, because Trump is a political opponent of Kamala Harris. But this applies to enemies too, like Vladimir Putin. It's absolutely no good me trying to say that Keir Starmer is more intelligent than Vladimir Putin, because I just don't think that's true. If it were, great, right? Bill Clinton and maybe Tony Blair are more gifted political operators, I would argue, than Putin. But I don't think Kamala Harris or Keir Starmer are. So we've got to be realistic about who we're dealing with, right? And if we've got bad actors who are opponents or bad actors who are enemies, the last thing we want to do, even if they are utterly incompetent across a range of capacities, as Putin is. Putin is wildly delusional. We don't want to miss out their still impressive capacities in certain dimensions if we actually want to defeat them as an opponent or defeat them as an enemy. So this was obviously me being extremely mean, and I'm thankful you've survived that. Lots of love.